Star Realms is a deck-building game with a space combat theme. The base game is designed for 2 players, though if you buy more decks you can play with more. Each player starts with 50 hit points or authority, and the object of the game is to bring your opponent's authority down to 0 before they can do the same to you. You start the game with a small deck of 10 cards, and during the game you'll be able to buy more powerful cards to build up your deck. Throughout the game, you'll be playing your cards, discarding them, and then shuffling your discards when you run out to continually cycle through your deck. The basic deck is contained in this tiny little box. As you can see, my copy is well loved. There are a number of expansions available, including Colony Wars and Frontiers, both of which are not only expansions, but also standalone games. In this video, I'm just going to use the basic deck. The box contains enough cards for 2 starter decks, 2 sets of authority tracker cards, the main deck, the explorers, and a rule sheet. To set up the game, give each player 2 Viper cards and 8 Scout cards. These make up the starting deck. Next, give each player their authority trackers. There are 2 different types and both are double-sided. Each player should put the first card on the 20 side, the next 2 on the 10 side, the next one on the 5 side, and the last 5 on the 1 side. If you prefer to use a different method of keeping track of your authority, go for it. These are a little clunky and they take up a fair amount of space. Next, put all the Explorer cards in a pile face up in the middle of the table. Then, shuffle all the remaining cards and put them in a pile face down in the middle of the table to form the trade deck. And last, flip over the top 5 cards and place them in a row between the trade deck and the Explorers to form the trade row. Determine who will go first using a coin toss or whatever other method you like. During the game, players will take turns drawing 5 cards from their personal decks and then playing those cards. Players should shuffle their decks and then draw their cards before the game starts. To compensate for the advantage of going first, the first player should only draw 3 cards on their first turn. Every other turn after that, both players will always draw 5 cards. On your turn, you can play all the cards you have in your hand. There are 3 different resources your cards can give you, and you can think of them as creating temporary resource pools. The 3 resources are Authority, Combat, and Trade. Your authority pool can simply be added to your current authority, making you harder to beat. Once all your cards are played, add all the authority that they give you together and add that to your total. Combat can be used to attack your opponent. You can either attack their authority or their bases. We'll talk more about bases later, but for now just know that you get to decide where your combat points go. Your trade is what you use to buy new cards from the trade row. If you buy a card from the main row, immediately flip over the next card from the trade deck to replace it. That way you may be able to buy cards that weren't available at the beginning of your turn. The cost of each card is in the top right-hand corner. You can only buy the card if you generate enough trade in a single turn. There's no limit to the number of cards you can buy per turn beyond the amount of trade you have. If you have any resources left at the end of your turn, you lose them. All 3 pools reset to 0 when you end your turn. Next, let's talk about the card types. There are 2 main types of cards, ships and bases. Ships will always be printed in the portrait orientation. These cards are always played and then discarded on the same turn. Bases are printed in the landscape orientation. They have a shield symbol with a number in the corner. The number is the strength of the base, which has to be matched by the same number of combat to destroy it. When a base is destroyed, it goes into your discard pile. When you play these, they stay in play until your opponent destroys them. Some bases will have silver shields and some will have black shields. The black shields will say outpost over the shield. When attacking your opponent, if there's an outpost in play, you have to attack that before you can attack the opponent's authority or their other bases. If there's more than 1 outpost in play, the attacker can choose which one to attack first. Bases also have to be destroyed in a single turn. If you don't have enough combat to destroy the base, you can't damage it at all. Next, let's talk about the abilities on the cards. Most cards have a primary ability in the first field here. This ability usually comes into effect as soon as you play the card. If it has a symbol of one of the 3 resources, add that to your resource pool. The next field on some cards is the ally ability. There are 4 factions in the game and each has a different icon representing them. If you play a card with a faction ability, that ability can only be used if you play another card with the same faction icon. So for example, if I play the Embassy Yacht and the Federation Shuttle, since they're both blue cards, the ally ability on the Federation Shuttle is now triggered. If I played the Federation Shuttle without another blue card, all it would give me is the 2 trade. The third field will have this trash can symbol next to it. This is the scrap ability. When you scrap a card, it goes into the scrap pile, not your discard pile. A card that is scrapped cannot re-enter the game. If you want to use this ability, you have to scrap the card, and then you can take the benefit. If you scrap an Explorer, just put it back on top of the pile of Explorers, since you're not supposed to be able to run out of those. Also, if you want to scrap a card this way, you can still take the primary and faction abilities it gives you before scrapping it. Once you've played your cards, decide how you'd like to use your resource pools. Add your authority to your total, split your combat up between the opponent's bases and authority, and buy cards from the trade row. Once your turn is over, discard all the ships you played. If you played any bases, they stay in play until they're destroyed by your opponent. To end your turn, draw 5 cards from the top of your draw deck. If you don't have enough, shuffle your discards and form a new draw deck. Take the rest of your cards to form your 5-card hand, and then play passes to your opponent. To win, all you have to do is reduce your opponent's authority to 0. And that's it. It's really a simple game to understand, but because of the random order that cards come out of the trade deck, your strategy can really change on a game-by-game basis. You have to adapt your strategy depending on which cards are available for you. Now I'm going to talk about some strategies and other things, but if all you wanted was the core rules, you should know enough now to get started. First, I'm going to give you an overview of the 4 different factions and what their cards tend to focus on. The red faction is known as the Machine Cult. The Machine Cult has very strong bases and has a lot of cards that allow you to scrap other cards from your deck. This ability allows you to trim the fat of your deck and build a very streamlined and lethal deck of cards. The other main focus of the Machine Cult is combat, so using only red cards is sometimes a very powerful strategy. The blue faction is the Trade Federation. The Trade Federation focuses on trade and authority. Going mostly blue is usually a very safe strategy, but will generally make the game take a lot longer since you will gain a lot of authority, but your own combat power will be quite low. The yellow faction is the Star Empire. The Star Empire focuses a lot on combat and on deck manipulation. There are a lot of yellow cards that make your opponent discard cards before they start their turn. There are also a fair number of cards that allow you to draw more cards on your own turn. The green faction is an alien faction known as the Blob. Blob cards are heavily combat focused. If you can collect a few blob cards early in the game, you can often end it very quickly. The Blob is also the only faction that has no outposts. All of their bases can simply be ignored when dealing damage to their owners, although it's never a great idea to leave too many bases in play. Most games you'll end up playing with a mix of different factions, and that's usually the best way to win. Just remember that many cards are much more powerful when they can use their ally abilities, and your odds of being able to use those ally abilities are lessened when you have too many factions. There are a number of variants described on the rule sheet, most of them dealing with adding more players. I personally enjoy the game most with just 2 players. I have tried some of the other variants, but I haven't really enjoyed them that much. And the variants of 1 player versus more than 1 player, which to me are the most interesting, are pretty unbalanced. If you want to try those, you might have to do a fair amount of tweaking to get them to work. Okay, that's all I have for this video. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. You may have noticed that my how to play content has slowed down a lot because I've started to run out of board games in my personal collection. I'm going to have to probably start borrowing games and learning how to play those before I can upload more videos. But I have plenty of other content planned, so stay tuned.